And I'm going to go get that kind of all set up while you go ahead. So.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Howard Eliason. I am a aviation medical examiner in Keller, Texas. So not too far from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I actually was about 20 minutes from the DFW airport. And so I talked to Alexandria earlier, and she is from Longview. So I think she's probably the closest person for to where LeTourneau is located. Who in here is more than 2 days driving time from their home? Where's your home?
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island? And anybody further than Rhode Island? Anybody grow up in a foreign country? Where'd you grow up at?
Bolivia.
Bolivia. Okay, very good. You might be the furthest away then. So we got kind of a representative, typical representative class from LeTourneau. People from as close as Longview to as far away as maybe Kenya or Ethiopia or wherever they might have grown up with their parents. But that being said, this picture was actually taken in the Eastern Med. So a few years ago. So this is one of the hazards of being in the military reserve. So I was flying the 777 at the time for American Airlines, and my squadron got mobilized to go help support the active duty Navy, and we spent. So I was the flight surgeon for a F-18 squadron at the time. So that squadron, we got mobilized to support the Operation Iraqi Freedom. And so we operated in the Eastern Med. Our airplanes flew over Turkey. After Turkey got okay with that, before that we flew over Saudi Arabia for a couple of nights. I don't know if I got any better pictures. Any of you served in the military? Navy, right?
Air Force Reserve.
Air Force? Well, you probably won't know the answer to this question. Any Navy or Marines in here? See that sign up above my left shoulder there? So this is a trauma room on the Theodore Roosevelt, is what this setting is. So that 2-1091L, anybody know what that is? That's your address on the ship. So the 2 means it's the second deck, 109 is the frame count from the front of the ship back, and I think the 1L has to do with where it is laterally from the center of the ship outward. So what you'd often hear on the ship is to be at general quarters or some sort of a medical emergency, and they'd say medical response team will in, they'd give a frame number. And none of you were here when the LeTourneau students ran the ambulance service. So when I was younger, I was at the ambulance service. Were you? Did you work
We
at?
knew the guys in United. No, we knew the guys that worked in it.
Okay.
A lot of the LAS guys.
We heard the stories.
Yeah, a lot of that. Yeah, LAS used to stand for Longview Ambulance Service. Before. So that was how I actually got interested in medicine. So I graduated from LeTourneau in 1979, and of course the airlines weren't hiring in 1979 and 80. They were furloughing. So I flew freight for a year and said, well, what am I going to do? And the guys I was flying freight with were all furloughed airline pilots, C-141, F-4s, and things. Shoot, I barely got 1,000 hours and light twins. How am I going to get a job in the airlines? These guys can't get a job and keep one. So I eventually I said, I'm kind of interested in medicine. They all said, oh, go to medical school. You don't want this career. So I did, and I got my student loans paid off, and my buddies were all getting hired at American, some of the other airlines. I said, well, is it too late for me to get hired? They said, well, no, we'll submit your application. We'll walk your resume through. And so by then, I was actually flying in the Army Guard. I flew helicopters and airplanes with the Army Guard. So that's a little bit of my background. That was before I got into the Navy Reserve as a flight surgeon. So when I was in this picture here, I was actually the flight surgeon for a Hornet Squadron. But I was the second most senior medical officer on the ship. So anyway, I'll see if I can advance one more slide. So this is the airplane I retired from, flying at American, the 787 there in the right part of the picture. And I'm not sure why I didn't get, looks like it's partly cut off, but So this is American 787 here in the foreground, and this is taken in Shanghai on the terminal in Shanghai. And so you can see some Chinese airlines in the background. So here's actually the topic we're going to talk about. Fly aviation medical certification. That 787 looks a little distorted in that picture. Somehow I think the PowerPoint distorted the pictures a little bit. But anyway, if you look at the airplane, everything on that airplane is regulated, basically. You know, the FAA regulates the nuts and bolts and screws and rivets, and you know, in this case, it's mostly a composite airplane, so just the way it's designed and built, it's all regulated by the FAA, including the pilots and their health. So that is why aviation medical certification exists. So this picture was taken at Dallas Love Field, and I put this picture up here because you can see the pilot in that F-15, and you can see the cockpit of that 737, and there's two pilots in that airplane, probably, maybe one on the jump seat, but their certification standards are a little different, as you might imagine. So the government that is paying the pilots to fly that F-15, they don't want to lose an F-15 because it's, you know, an expensive airplane to lose, and there's only one pilot in a lot of the tactical airplanes. So, like I used to say in the Navy, they don't want a $15 or $20 million airplane with a pilot that's got some sort of medical condition trying to land on the back of the ship at night. On the other hand, the Southwest crew that's flying that airplane, they might have a whole host of medical conditions, and they might have waivers for them. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Air Force pilots can have waivers too, but they're harder to get, especially if you're a tactical pilot, like this guy. So this airplane, I think, is from the Louisiana Air Guard. And again, I think the picture looks just a little distorted. Anybody in here does not know what a first-class medical, and a second-class medical, and a third-class medical, what their differences are? Well, a first-class medical is basically a medical certificate for pilots who are going to operate and exercise the privileges of their airline transport pilot certificate, which in most cases is going to be a 121 FAR Part 121 operation, which is a major airline. Could be some Scheduled 135 operations also require it. A second-class medical basically is for crew members that are getting paid, but not in those operations that are described in the first class. Third class is what you'd like to have or would need to have to fly, you know, private pilot privileges or just flying your own personal airplane or flying an airplane where you're sharing expenses with somebody. You can do that as a third class. So how long are they valid? So let me say if you're younger, they're valid for a longer time. 12 months, 12 calendar months. So the FAA, you know, they like to talk about calendar months. What does that mean, you know? So today is the 1st of February. You get your medical, and say you get a second class medical. When does it expire? End of February?
Yeah, the last day of the month of the following.
Exactly. So because of the FAA's terminology, calendar months, it always expires at the end of the month. So if you got your medical today on the 1st of February, you get the entire month of February, and then 12 months after that. So that's true of all of the calendar month descriptions. When you're over 40, your first class medical is only good for 6 months if you're going to exercise ATP privileges. So what that means is you're a captain on a scheduled airline carrier, you're likely to be required to have a first class medical. If you're a pilot on a long range airplane flying the 787, 777, all the relief pilots on there, many of the carriers require the relief pilots to all have first class medicals that are valid so that they can function as the pilot in command when the pilot in command is back in the bunk sleeping. And Tim, you had bunks on the KC-10, right? Yeah, you had rest areas on the KC-10, but not on the 320, I don't think. There's no bunks on the 320.
There are bunks on the 787? There are bunks on the 787?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2 bunks on the 787, and we also usually have a first class or business class seat also one seat, and then there's 2 bunks. So 2 people can go to the bunk, or 1 person bunk, and 1 person goes and watches a movie. You know, they call him the film critic. The other pilot is called the FB, the food boy. So that's what they call him in America. And other airlines actually have different names. They call him, relief for international officers. So the second class medical is pretty easy. It's always only good for 12 calendar months. Third class has got a couple of brackets there. If you're under 40, you have 60 calendar months on a third class, and 24 calendar months on if you're over 40. The first class medical, it actually still says first class in your certificate, but if you take it longer than a year, then it reverts to third class privileges for the time frames that are listed there for your age. And so the age is actually the age you were when you had your medical prior to passing age 40. Some people may not know this, so the first class exam differs from a second class only in that it occasionally requires an EKG. One EKG at 35 and then annually after 40. You have to have 20/20 vision for distant vision for a first class. Second class requires 20/20. And a third class is the same as a Texas driver's license. 20/40. Uncorrected. You don't have to be corrected even. So here's vision requirements. A lot of people might be interested in that. You have to have color vision of some sort. You can actually not pass the color vision test, which are those little colored circles with the dots in it. You can actually not pass that as long as you can pass the practical test that the FAA operational inspectors will administer at the airport usually. So the visual acuity, you have distant visual acuity and near visual acuity and intermediate vision. For first and second class medicals, intermediate vision is checked after you reach age 50. Well, I got my glasses lying up here. So that if you need to see something, arm's length, which is the intermediate distance, 32 inches. Or the near vision is 16 inches, which is a distance you theoretically maybe read a book or your iPad. But the iPad has made your glasses almost obsolete because what's everybody do with their iPad? Like that, with their finger and zoom in on the text. So, the distance vision, like I mentioned, is required to correct the 20/20. You can correct it with LASIK. You can correct it with corrected lenses. And the near vision only has to be 20/40 for near and intermediate for first and second class. Third class is 20/40 all the way across. Distance, near, and intermediate is never required for the third class. How many of you have your aviation medical examiner turn your back and then they say something to you and say, "What did I just say?" Anybody want to tell me if they have that?
He's in the other room typing my application up while he's talking to me.
Yeah. So my test, I usually talk over the wall.
Apply 7.3, I can hear you.
Yeah. So I usually say, hey, I say you're taking on a motorcycle today or something like this. If they say something that's appropriate to that comment, that's not usually my medical or my hearing test for most people. But the technical administration of the test is supposed to be a conversational voice at 6 feet from the examiner with your back to the examiner. So you might say, well, what if I'm deaf in one ear? Doesn't matter. As long as you can hear at 6 feet. So I didn't mention you can lose vision in one eye and still be certified by the FAA. So another option for the hearing test is audiometry, where you've maybe been in a booth where they've given you some pure tones. You hear the beeps and you recognize when the beeps occur. So that is hearing testing. And blood pressure is the next thing. A lot of people are interested in blood pressure because I think everybody's blood pressure goes up when they see their AME, right? They sort of call that white coat hypertension, but I always say I never wear a white coat. And most of my patients don't have high blood pressure, but so the FAA's limit is 155/95. And the reason I put those question marks up there, that's not very healthy. But it is the limit for the FAA. So if you have blood pressure that is 155/95 in the exam, Good enough? It's good for the FAA standard. I always tell people before they get anywhere close to this, I say, you know, your blood pressure is going up a little bit. You go see your family doctor and see what they think about your blood pressure. You know, think if you maybe should be on some medication. And next time you come, if you're on medication and you're doing fine, I can issue it. Is anybody in here that heard the term khaki? Khaki conditions? So AMEs can issue the certificate under certain conditions without having a special issuance from the FAA, which is their term for a waiver. So CACI, C-A-C-I, stands for conditions AMEs can issue. Not too imaginative, but that's what the FAA uses. And blood pressure happens to be one of those conditions. It used to require a waiver by the FAA. Now if you come in on blood pressure medicine you're controlled, I can issue it without submitting it to the FAA for them to issue. Here's a slide that's not very good because it's not a good PowerPoint slide. So, you know, if you look at that slide, you say, I can't even read what's up there. You know, there's all these different things on there. But what this really says is that there are certain conditions. So if you go into your AME and you have any of these conditions that are listed up there on the list, I cannot issue you a medical certificate. It has to be deferred to the FAA, and it could be that, you know, they might eventually give you a special issuance for it if you had a heart replacement. You're thinking, heart replacement? A heart transplant, they're going to issue. They actually have a few people that had heart transplants. Many of those conditions actually might eventually be waiverable. Epilepsy is probably the hardest one. You know, if you had a seizure. One of my patients one time had a seizure in his hotel room, he thought. And he was taking an antibiotic for a sinus infection. And he woke up in his hotel room, his tongue was all sore, it was all chewed up. And then he gets home after his trip, you know, his go-home flight, and he jumps in the airplane and commutes home like we heard Nate talking about. And he gets home, and his wife says, oh, you know, she wakes him up, hey, you okay? He's shaking in bed. She calls 911, the ambulance comes, takes him to the hospital. And he was diagnosed with a seizure. Probably related to his antibiotic he was taking. Never had one before. He'd flown A-10s in the Air Force. And so, you know, he probably had a pretty healthy track record up to that point. But he was off from Delta for 5 years. So he went to seminary while he was off, which I guess is probably a good thing to do. But anyway, so but he's back flying now at Delta, I'm sure. So you maybe even flown in it, Steve. No. So those are the conditions. I just put those up there. You can find these online. I'm gonna show you where to find a lot of that online here in just a second. So here's the FAA website. Does everybody in here have an aviation medical certificate already? No? A couple of answers, no. Okay. So I will talk about this. I was going to skip over this slide if there had everybody had been to this site before, but when you go to get an aviation medical exam, you first go to this website that says https://medexpress.faa.gov. You create a personal account on this website. And then after you get your account created, which requires a email and creating a password and a little demographic information so they sort of think they know who you are. And then you you start a new application, complete the application, which leads to the completion of the FAA Form 8500-8. From the confirmation number window, you want to print the completed application, take a copy to your AME's office with you. And when you print it off, it should have your confirmation number in the lower margin of the printout. So that is the medical exam application website. And here's the FAA general website. This has got a lot of good information. If you just want to look up and say, well, I wonder what the Aviation Medical Examiner's Guide says about this condition I'm thinking about, or my friend has. You know, so everybody says, oh, my friend, you know, he's calling me up and say, hey, my friend has got this. He's telling me, you know, hit his head, passed out, hit his head, lost consciousness for 15 minutes. What do you think about that? You know, it turns out it's him. You know? So on this screen here, when you're on the FAA.gov website, you go to the horizontal index and find the licenses and certificates tab. Select medical certification or medical certificate, and then you can go down and see how to obtain a medical certificate. You can go to another tab on that page and locate the closest aviation medical examiner to your zip code. I will say that not all AMEs can issue a first-class certificate. Some of the newer ones can only issue second and third-class certificates. So if you want to do a first class, make sure you go to the right tab. So I put this up for just for talking about different things that occur as we get older. And these often turn out to be things that can cause some people to have to get waivers. For hypertension, I already mentioned, is actually a khaki condition, so you don't have to get a waiver for it. But then there's obesity, and if you get a body mass index of 35, which is, you can pull up on your phone and look up how to find your body mass index. But basically, if you're fairly overweight, you might reach a body mass index of 35. And if that happens, and you're in your AME's office, he might send you to see a sleep specialist, because that's required by the FAA. The very least you can do at that point is to at least counsel you about your weight and ask you some questions that might lead to some suspicion that you have obstructive sleep apnea. And then the other conditions listed there: diabetes, heart conditions, cataracts. Cataracts are not a very significant problem. You can get your cataracts replaced and actually be back flying in about 2 or 3 weeks. It doesn't even require a waiver. Interestingly, the FAA, if you have a tear in the back of your eye, you have to have laser treatment of the tear in the back of the eye. You have to have a waiver for that, the special issuance. If they do surgery to the front of your eye, where your cornea is, or your lens of your eye, where the cataracts might occur, so a cataract is an obstruction inside the lens of the eye. If they do surgery to that, you don't have to have a waiver. So the back of the eye is actually where the retina, the nerve that leads to the vision acquisition, goes back to the brain. And the FAA thinks that's more significant. They actually have some surgical procedure that requires treatment of the back of the eye. So I mentioned hearing loss. That's pretty common. 737, everybody loses their hearing eventually if they don't wear hearing protection in the airplane. Airbus is not so much. Airbus is quieter. 787 is a lot quieter than the 737. Cancers also, occur more frequently as you get older, and injuries occur more frequently. Injuries are kind of a different situation, however, because there tends to be a bimodal pattern of injuries. So you have a young age where people get injured, riding motorcycles and doing things where they are taking risk. As you get older, you often don't recognize you're taking a risk. You might climb a ladder and do something up on your roof. You're cleaning your eaves on your house because you don't want to pay somebody to do it. And you're 60 years old, your balance isn't quite as good. You don't even recognize it. You fall off the ladder and get a head injury. That could be a bad situation. So that leads to my next slide, which is an ounce of prevention. What's the rest of it?
Pound a cure.
Say that louder.
Pound a cure.
Pound a cure, yeah. An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So the top item I put on there is in, let me read that. So I got Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. I probably actually know it, but I don't.
It's the KZX house verse.
You want to say it?
Sure. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and not in your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge Him. You shall direct your path.
Very good. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Everybody hear that? So Matthew 6:33 is the other verse I have up there. And that is probably, I imagine somebody can say that right at the top of their head too. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So I put that along with that comment about avoiding unnecessary stress. How many of you have heard of the book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and It's All Small Stuff? Anybody heard of that book? Yeah. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that book, but this is probably, those things are probably good things to help reduce unnecessary stress, because you really don't gain much by worrying about things that you don't have much control over, and God does have control over. So maintaining a normal body weight is also worthwhile. Aerobic exercise. Anybody have any idea of what the recommended aerobic exercise frequency is?
Minutes a day, 3 times a week. 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week.
That's good, and somewhere between 3 and 4 or 5 times a week, depending on the intensity. I think if you're doing the more infrequent times, like 3 times, I think they recommend a higher intensity of aerobic exercise and a more mild aerobic exercise for more days. How about strength training? Do you know what the recommendation for that is? Anybody know what that is off the top of their head?
Twice a week.
Twice a week. Good. Very good. What's your name?
Danielle.
Daniel? Yeah. Danielle is absolutely correct on what the recommendations are. Very good. So besides the exercise, maintain a healthy diet as much as possible. And that isn't always possible with the food they serve on an airplane, right? I don't know if United and Delta's food is any better than Americans, but all the food they have is a little marginal at best. So adequate rest, that is dependent probably on the type of flying you're doing. You know, Nate mentioned, that if you fly long distances, you might fly one trip, one leg, go to the hotel. But you fly one leg from Dallas to Shanghai, or Dallas to Beijing. It's like 15 hours of flying time. And when you get there, you're basically almost 12 hours out of your normal cycle. So it's harder to get rest on some of those trips. Also mentioned treating or monitor for and treat elevated cholesterol. And the next couple of lines I think are kind of important. When you're outdoors, if you want to try to prevent cataracts, wearing sunglasses that block the UV rays is a good idea. Unfortunately, most of us didn't start that when we were 5 years old. So our damage from the UV rays is actually cumulative over our lifetime. So start as early as you can wearing some sort of eye protection to protect against UV rays. And then I mentioned the hearing protection. If you're flying a 737 or any other airplane that's particularly noisy, you should wear noise canceling headsets at the very minimum. Probably some hearing, earplugs might be a good choice also if you don't have a noise canceling headset readily available to you. I mentioned a dust mask. If you're doing yard work or things in a dusty environment where you might be exposed to dust or dirt or mold spores, those things can be very hazardous to your pulmonary health. And then the last thing I mentioned up there is risk management. I think Tim mentioned crew resource management. So I work at Southwest Airlines now as an instructor. So they talk about risk resource management. It's the same, essentially the same topic. So one of the principles of risk management is don't take any unnecessary risk. If you can avoid flying in a thunderstorm, avoid flying in a thunderstorm. If you can avoid climbing up on a ladder, when you're tired or when, you don't have somebody to watch the bottom of the ladder, keep it from slipping, avoid that kind of thing. Be careful. I've had one of my patients over the years had a little metal work he was doing in his garage, and he was going to polish it up on a grinding wheel with a wire brush on the grinding wheel. You've probably seen that thing, and it has a wire brush. He had safety glasses in his garage, probably as little as 10 or 15 feet away. He said, well, it's just going to take a second. Well, what do you think happened? In that second, he reached over and polished up that thing. One of the wire bristles came off the wire wheel and went into his eye. And fortunately for him, he actually didn't lose his sight over it, but it cost him a few weeks of being off. His eye healed up, but they had to go in and remove this wire brush fragment from his eye. And but fortunately, he's doing fine now, and he didn't lose his sight. I did mention to you that there are, I think about maybe around 10 pilots that fly for airlines that have one eye. So Losing an eye is not totally the end of the world, but it's not necessarily the best thing. It takes you at least 6 months. The FAA wants you to get 6 months of adaptation to being one-eyed or monocular, so you're having one eye to see. So this is a trip that one of the trips, I just took a picture of my EFD.
You had to one up me, didn't you? Just yeah, barely.
I wanted to see what you had
I was
first.
asleep the whole time.
Yeah, so when you reach that area right between Alaska and Siberia, that's about 6.5 hours into the flight. So usually the break going over there's 2 3-hour breaks. You have 3 hours of work, 3 hours of rest, 3 hours of work, and 3 hours of rest, and then you land in Beijing or Shanghai. Now, I didn't put that up there to talk about the flight. I put that up there to remind me to talk about the news. And probably everybody in here, who's heard of the Wuhan coronavirus? Is there anybody in here who hasn't heard of the Wuhan coronavirus? So, I mean, it's making the news right now. I mean, it's led to a declaration of a national health emergency. And the World Health Organization, kind of same, they've encouraged all of the countries of the world to basically come up with the same type of response. And it's the first time I can recollect where they actually have quarantined a whole airplane full of people and kept the people in the airport confined for, I guess, 2 weeks, I guess, in California, for the group of people they evacuated from near Wuhan, the State Department. So is it significant to us? Not right now, but keep your ear tuned to the news, because they don't know. I guess the doubling time for the infection is about 7 days. So what they've seen is every 7 days that number of people that are infected is doubling. And we have recorded here in the U.S. At least one case already where it's transferred from person to person. Now, that was, I think, up in Chicago or Illinois, near Chicago. But, so that's why I put the slide up there with this, to remind me to talk about the Wuhan virus. And that leads me to the questions. So, that ship is the Theodore Roosevelt in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the Theodore Roosevelt, you remember what Teddy Roosevelt, one of his favorite sayings was? Yeah, say that louder. Yeah, that's the big stick. Any questions for me?
I had a quick question about, they changed the retirement age a few years ago from age 60 to 65. Mm-hmm. Is there any studies been done on pilots that don't make it to full 65? Is there a lot of, there's lots of stories about that, but can these guys expect to make it to 65, or is there a lot of health issues that approach that are cutting guys off at the end?
I would say that there's not a lot of people that probably couldn't make it to 65. So it's probably a pretty good, especially if you follow my preventive recommendations. I think you'll have a lot better chance to make it to 65 if you maintain a normal body weight, normal blood pressure, and try to keep your blood sugar monitored under control. So with those recommendations in mind, I think you have a pretty good chance of making it 65. Do I have any 65-years that are very overweight? Yes, I do. I have a couple of them that are probably pushing 280 or 90 pounds. But, and I try to encourage them not to, to exercise more, eat less. And usually what happens, if they actually change, I'll tell you one very brief story. I had a patient came in, I said, hey, your blood pressure's starting to creep up. I said, I really want you to go see your doctor and get checked, and maybe get on some medication for your blood pressure. And he was about 80 pounds overweight. So he was probably close to 275, 280 pounds. Well, he didn't come to see me in 6 months. I guess I really irritated him. So, I made him mad by telling him he needed to lose, weight. And, well, he came to see me at a year, and when he walked up to my office, I said, man, he looks like he's got cancer or something. He'd lost so much weight. And when he came into the office, we were talking, I said, well, how are you feeling? I said, you look like you've lost a bit of weight. I said, that's good. I said, how did that happen? He said, well, you remember you told me to go get my blood pressure checked? He said, well, not only did my doctor find I needed high blood pressure treatment, they found I had diabetes. And so that was the trigger that made him lose the weight. because there's actually some books out that guide people through dietary changes, and probably the majority of people with adult onset diabetes could actually reverse the course of their diabetes by dietary changes alone, without medication. So would you rather treat your diabetes with diet, eat your way to good health, or would you rather take several pills a day? You can answer that question. I'm not going to put somebody on the spot and ask them what they would rather do.
A follow-up to Steve's question, do you see age 67 or 70 or never coming along for retirement? How many more years may you sit and write Steve's comments?
How long have you been at Southwest?
12 years.
12 years? You're very close.
Yeah, I could upgrade West Coast, but I prefer staying low. But is there any talk in the FAA on 67 or 70 or?
Well, the rumor is, I hear rumors all the time. It's already proved. They just got to get it, they just got to announce it. And I don't know, if that's really true or if those are just rumors that people are wishfully thinking might happen. I think it probably will change eventually. I don't know if it will change this year, next year, or 5 years from now. But they probably will change it to something around 67, 68, somewhere in there first. And it may eventually be that they won't require any retirement age. I think in some ways it's good for the companies to have a retirement age because then they can plan maybe a little bit better. But as far as health reasons, I probably have a couple of dozen of my pilots that fly commercially as business jet pilots that are in their early 70s. And I think they're probably as sharp as a lot of my patients that are 61 or 2.
So I don't currently have my medical yet because the FAA is reviewing why I put depression on the application. So can you kind of speak into that and mental health as it relates to like our current generation and future generation of pilots?
Yeah, let me answer that in 2 different steps. So I didn't mention this on the slide where it says I have to defer medical conditions, but if you read down there, bipolar is actually one of the things that I can't issue. The FAA chooses to issue that individually. And they will issue it now if you're on one of the 5 approved medications and there's a certain time frame that they look at that. So the other thing that a lot of people, when you're younger now, it seems like a lot of younger people when they're in school, maybe having trouble focusing, and so, we think maybe you have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. And if you get started in getting treated for that, that can be a hang up with the FAA also. So if that applies to anybody that's interested in trying to get their medical certificate, what they probably are best served is trying to get off from the medication and see if they can be off from it for 6 or 8 months before they apply. And if you're able to be off from it and do well clinically, then that makes it a lot easier for that specific question. Again.
How do you, how does the FAA deal with pilots with food allergies?
They don't specifically address that. That's, as long as you can function with manage your food allergies, there's no prohibition as far as getting your medical certificate. Any other questions? I think I'm standing between you and lunch. So I think Laura just looked in the door. Anybody else have any questions you can ask me on the break?
I think we're going to do maybe, our whole schedule's kind of flexible here, but maybe 20, 30 minutes of lunch. We may call you back in. We're going to try to do a little panel thing, so if we're eating in here, maybe Laura knows what we're going to do, but I was just wondering, are we coming
we
here?
can eat here.
Okay, so if we come in here and we get settled, and then I'm going to ask